That's great.
You know, it's like,
Hey everybody,
I gotta go.
thanks for coming out. We're gonna start in just a few minutes. Once the short film is done, there'll be just a couple minute delay as we switch over to the presentation, and then we'll do the history and the behind the scenes and a Q&A. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoy.
My name is Romaine Tenney. I was born on my family's Vermont farm in 1900. I'm almost 64 years old now, and I've kept the place just like it was when I was a boy. No electricity and no gas-powered machinery, not even a tractor or car. One morning, things changed. My land was in the path of progress. Some people don't understand living this way without modern conveniences. Well, it's just the way I like to farm. Simple and peaceful. It's all for the love of the land.
It'll just take a second. I have to switch to the presentation and I'll be right back down. Okay. First, thanks everybody for coming. I know it goes by quick, but it's 4 years of work, if you can believe it, for for just under 10 minutes of animation. So, love of the land, thanks for coming. Before I jump in, I have to do a few thank yous. So, thank you to Vermont Public. You probably noticed them in the credits. They have a Made Here fund that they started, which is to help fund emerging filmmakers, storytellers, other people around the state. So thank you for that. They helped me finish it with some funds, which was excellent. Also want to say thank you to the Wethersfield Historical Society. They were pretty crucial in this process, whether it was researching, getting photos, finding out about the history. Thank you to them. And of course, thank you to the Welden Theatre for hosting us tonight. I'm doing screenings around the state, and it's really a pleasure to be here. Okay, huge picture of myself, which is always fun to see. A little about me. I'm Travis Van Alstyne. I grew up in southern Vermont in Chester, which is down by Springfield, Ascutney area. So only about 20 minutes from where Romaine Tenney would have lived. I grew up my entire life in Chester, went to the Savannah College of Art and Design for 4 years where I studied animation. Missed Vermont so much I had to come back. I haven't left since, so I've been here since then working on animation projects and other technology type stuff. And that brings us to Travis Animates, which is bringing Vermont stories to life through animation. That's me. It's just a one-man production company, so there's nothing too big budget about this. It's just me. But this is hopefully the first of many historical stories about Vermont that I'll be able to tell through animation. Okay, I have to pat myself on the back a little bit before we get into it. I've been really honored to win some awards at some film festivals, which is fantastic, especially if I can point out the one over here. I was really excited to go to Manchester, Vermont to the first year of the Vermont Film and Folklore Festival. where I got Audience Award for Best Short, which was, I felt honored since there were so many wonderful Vermont stories alongside me. Oops. Whoops. And here are all the film festivals so far that the film has been accepted into. I've been really excited to be able to get Romaine's story, a Vermont story, out into the world. So that's festivals in Vermont, New England, international, around the US. So that's really exciting. But let's dive into the history now that I've done all the formalities. So for the history, why choose Romaine Tenney? Well, about 4 years ago, just before the pandemic started, I was trying to decide what type of animation I wanted to do. As you may or may not know, by the way, I talk with my hands and very fluid. I do very cartoony things usually, so this was a departure for me. But I really wanted to do a serious piece on Vermont history, and Romaine Tenney jumped to the forefront of my mind because growing up in southern Vermont, I heard Romaine Tenney's story a handful of times. It was never taught in schools or part of any curriculum or anything like that. It was more of a word-of-mouth folklore type of thing. I heard it when I was younger, but the one time it really stuck was I was probably 15 years old, 16 years old, and was riding around with a friend at night because there's not a lot to do in Chester, so we would drive around the back roads, and we happened to find our way to Ascutney. And when we got to Ascutney, he then retold the story that his parents had told him about Romaine Tenney. And that story always has stuck with me. It's always felt like such a Vermont story, such a story about what progress is, sense of place, so many things like that. So that story always stuck with me. Jump 20 years ahead to where we are now, and when I was thinking about which animation to do, Romaine Tenney was my first and only choice to be able to tell his story. So that's why I chose to tell his story. So here's a little bit about Romaine. His name was Romaine Edwin Tenney. As you heard in the film, he was born in 1900. He died in 1964. What I found so interesting about Romaine Tenney was in all the literature I read, the articles I read, people I talked with, the Historical Society, family members, all that, the words that they kept saying were kind, gentle, and friendly. And this was even with everything that was going on with his land and eminent domain. Everyone in town talked about his humanity and who he was as a person and how he carried on. There's stories of everyone in town knew him since he didn't have any gas-powered machinery when it was time to do his groceries or pick something up from the store. He would have to go to Claremont, New Hampshire, which was 6 miles away, and he would just start walking. And apparently people would see him and pick him up, and he would chat with them, and they'd bring him to the local store where he could pick up things, and then they might wait around for him, or he might start walking back the other way, and he'd get picked up again. And people just constantly talked about how kind he was. He loved when his nieces and nephews would come visit on the farm. He just really, really loved his sense of place, his land, his farm, his animals, his way of life, everything. So this is the Tenney family in the early 1900s. From the film you saw it, but I'll point it again. This is Romaine, the little boy right here. And he was one of 9 children, so a large farm family. And one interesting thing is they always had dogs. I always read that he always loved having usually multiple dogs as pets. Sons of Myron and Rosa Tenney. Here we are left to right. These are the 5 boys. There's Mano, Myron, Romaine is in the middle, Elwyn and Emerson. This is from the Wethersfield Historical Society. It's nice to see these pictures of when he was a younger man. Here's some more pictures from the Wethersfield Historical Society. He utilized his land for multi-purpose, so he would do his own logging in a woodlot. Here he is as an older gentleman with his dog. I think this dog is Prince, I've been told. Excellent. Hold on. There we go. I came across this photo from the Wethersfield Historical Society. Someone named Lois Kahn took this picture in 1962, just a couple years before he passed away. And you can see him on this machine for haying. Again, no gas-powered machinery. He did this with his horses. And what was great about seeing this image is shortly after seeing this image, I saw a short film clip, the only bit of film that I've seen of Romaine that I've seen existed, and it comes from Nora Jacobson's Freedom and Unity, the Vermont movie. And this is the only little bit of film of Romaine himself, I assume taken maybe around that similar time period. Hold on. Whoa. This gentleman here is Rod Spalding. He was part of the Ascutney Volunteer Fire Department in 1964. He was actually on scene the night of the fire at Romaine Tenney's farm. There's a video on YouTube. I would encourage anyone that's interested to look it up, where it's about a 15-minute interview. Here he is at the park and ride off of exit 8, which is where the tree stood for Romaine Tenney. This photo is courtesy of Nancy Newtown McMenemy from 2016. And he, as part of the video, he just talks about the whole sky was just one big red fireball at about 2 a.m. when he heard the bell ringing. He ran to the fire department, met the chief at the time. They headed down to the farm, or up to the farm at that point, and they said the whole sky was just a red fireball and there was nothing that they could do. They only, I believe in the video, he said he only had 150 gallons of water and there's nothing they'd be able to do to sadly help. Sadly, Rod Spalding just passed away at the end of June as well, but he has a fantastic interview if you're interested. These are photos of the house and barn from the Wethersfield Historical Society. The house here on the left, you can see where the porch used to be attached that had long been removed. It's noted that people loved this gingerbread style house so much that a lot of out-of-state folks would purposely stop their car and get photos with Romaine in front of his house because they just loved the style of it. So one thing I want to point out is it's easy looking back and seeing my film. One thing that's really important to remember is when Interstate 91 was going in, also Interstate 89, at the time it was seen as progress and modern and was really seen by the majority of people as a positive thing that was going to open up Vermont. You would hear that a lot in different articles and things, that this was going to open up Vermont and let people stream in and how beneficial it was going to be. So it's worth setting the stage that the majority of people at the time in 1964 were very happy about it and would even drive onto sections of the open highway because it would be constructed in pieces and it would open in pieces and they could get on one exit and get off the next, and it was kind of an exciting thing at the time. Whoa, whoa. Please hold. Okay. How much did the state of Vermont offer Romaine Tenney for his property in 1964? The original offer was $10,600 for his 90-acre farm, which would be about $105,000 today. He went to court, as you heard from my animation, and the court said that you would have to pay, what, a good third more, so $13,600, or $134,000 today. Worth noting here is you could take this in a few different ways. You could take it that, is this enough money? Or you could also realize, is this reflection of how land and home prices have gotten out of whack in modern times? But this is just a conversion of those numbers for you.
How many acres did he have?
90. Sorry, hold on. Whoa! It's like it waits and then it's really happy to go forward. So just to set the stage, since we're way up here in northwestern Vermont, we're talking down southeast Vermont in Ascutney, which on the map here, you can see this is Ascutney, here's Claremont, here's Ludlow and Springfield. It's exit 8. And you can see from this is 91 running north-south right here. His house would have been approximately right about here, which is the exit 8 north and southbound exit right here. You know, a little bit more about that. We'll wait a sec. So this is an overlay from the Wethersfield Historical Society, which I had not seen until after I had pretty much finished up the animation. When I met with them back in March, they said, have you ever seen this overlay? And what they had here was the before and the after. So you can see here's the old road that existed before. This is where Romaine's house is. And you can see quite literally the highway runs right over the center of where his house would have been located. This is the park and ride. The tree would have existed about right here. I think that's the tree. And to me, it was just such a sight to see this and just that visual of how the highway, it wasn't that it cut through part of his land to either side, it was right over the top of the house.
Couldn't they go around it?
Ooh. It's gonna go crazy here in a second, I think. Here we go. Also, when I was down talking with the Wethersfield Historical Society, they had a whole bunch of kind of artifacts and things that they wanted to show me, and one of which was Romaine Tenney's mailbox that someone discovered on the side of the road after the fire, kept it in their personal collection for a while, and then gave it as a gift to the Historical Society down the road. So this is now part of their collection. So the tree as a motif in Love of the Land, you'll notice I keep coming back to that tree throughout the process. So that the tree existed for 55 years. It existed standing on his property, the last thing that existed of Romaine Tenney's. And I wanted to keep coming back to that tree as time passed by, as the tree kind of stood there as a testament to that. This is a letter that an arborist basically was saying that the tree is at the end of its life. What happened is the tree was beginning to have poor health. It had been standing for 55 years. It was starting to shed branches and becoming a little bit of a hazard for the park and ride. So the state had an arborist look and say, yes, the tree does need to be removed. It's past its life. So this was the start. This is 2019. This was the start of what I think was a firestorm that the state was not anticipating. Because what happened shortly after that, in October of 2019, is Vermont residents fight the removal of the tree. You can see in this picture, again, this is Dylan Tenney. He actually was in the credits and helped me out, and I connected with him, and I'll talk more about him a little later. But basically, the state held a community meeting to get people's opinions and see what should be done about the tree, and a ton of people showed up. Like, it was kind of unexpected. Tons of people showed up and were saying we don't want the tree removed. It's the last thing honoring Romaine Tenney, and it was the entire community really showed up. So here is the tree a picture I took March 13th, 2021. So it was delayed being cut down for 2 years. They didn't know what they were going to do, how they were going to proceed. So with COVID and everything else happening, there was a delay. And I actually was able to come down 4 days before the tree was cut down to take this photo. You can see the tree is definitely in poor shape, and they've had to barricade off some of the parking spaces in the park and ride. But that was not the end of the story for the tree. What happened is the tree did have to be removed, and it picked up not only statewide, but national news. Here on the left, here's an article, I believe, from Vermont Digger from 2021, talking about the maple tree coming down. The middle article is from Vermont Public. They're pondering how are they going to memorialize Romaine Tenney after removing the tree. What were they going to do to kind of keep his memory alive? And on the far right is an article from the New York Times, which was picked up, called Goodbye to a Yankee Farmer, The Ghost of Exit 8, which is a fantastic article by Ellen Berry. And it got national news about this tree being removed. Whoops. So I just recently went down to show what the site looks like now. You can see this is the stump of the tree, and it has stone around it with flowers. An interesting story I was told by the Wethersfield Historical Society was they went to try to get local people to remove the stump, people that did that type of work, and all the local people refused to remove the stump. So it was decided the stump would become part of the memorial, which I think is wonderful. And I was down there, it has flowers around it, and you can see the pavilion in the back there. And I have some more photos from that. Here we are, here's the stump again with flowers. This says the Romaine Tenney Memorial Park. They have a little pavilion where there's places you can sit and have a picnic. And there's a placard, which I'll show you a closer photo of, that talks about Romaine Tenney's history. That's at the site now, so individuals that are knowing or unknowing can come and learn more about Romaine Tenney. Worth noting, and I forgot to mention before, is before the tree was cut down, people would come and actually put flowers and other vigil type stuff there just before it was going to happen, just to show you that connectedness that the tree had for the town. And talking about that connectedness, at the library, the Proctor Library in Ascutney, they took quite a bit of wood from the tree and made some things from it. One of the things that I think is wonderful is this checkers and chessboard that's at the library. It was made from wood from the tree. I also talked to individuals that had wooden bowls and other things made, so there was a very deep connectedness to this story in the tree. Just to show you that deep connectedness, there's been a lot of inspiration that Romaine Tenney has had. This is only some. In the showings I've done around the state, people have come up and told me more examples already of how Romaine Tenney's story has inspired individuals. On the left here, there's been a lot of music. This is Romaine Tenney by Banjo Dan Linder. Fantastic song. There's Spark by Ben Fuller. The Ballad of Romaine Tenney by Sean Kelly Murray, and there's a historical fiction book called Just Compensation by, I'm going to get this wrong, Richard Lechthaler. If anyone is historian-minded and loves to do research, there's always help that can be done to contribute to the Wikipedia article on Romaine Tenney. Prior to this project that I started, there wasn't a Wikipedia article for Romaine Tenney. There was one that had been started in draft. I was able to work with some other people to get a Wikipedia article up with different references to news articles and photos. The benefit of having that is now if people search for Romaine Tenney, that can populate Google when you get your search results. And I like to joke, you'll see this handsome devil right here in the right. He may look familiar to you. This is a story that I had done. I don't know why it pulled my story up, but it did, and I thought it was interesting. The most impactful thing for me was when I visited with the Historical Society in March. They were so wonderful and opening to give me tons of information and tell me about Romaine's story again. But they had mentioned, had I ever gone to Romaine Tenney's gravesite? And I hadn't. yet with the project? And I said, no. And they said, well, would you like us to take you? And I said, absolutely, I'd be honored to do that. And when they took me there, what really took me aback was the epitaph that said, guardian of his land and friend to all, was what it is. And I think that's perfectly sums up Romaine Tenney, how important his land was to him and how kind he was to the individuals around him. Okay, I'm gonna pivot to behind the scenes, and then if people have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So behind the scenes. So it was 4 years to make the project. It started in late 2019. It's about 3,000 hand-drawn digital frames of animation, which is a lot of drawing, and 1,000 hours of animation. So basically, in the 4 years for the entire project, 2 of that was just animation. And as I'll talk about a little bit, the style of animation is an important thing we'll come back to. But first, I want to mention my collaborators around the state that I've had. Juliana Brazil in Burlington did the background art. George Woodard did a fantastic job as the narrator, bringing Romaine Tenney to life. Georgie Darling did additional sound effects. Ida Mae Specker in Andover, Vermont did music. Alex Knowles from Chester, where I grew up, did sound design. So it was really an effort around the state, all of us working together to do it. This is George Woodard. Hanging Mud Flat Productions is his company. This was amazing. George is a dairy farmer in Waterbury Center, if you don't know, and he is also a filmmaker and actor. So it was like, I don't know if I could find someone better to do the voice than George, because he just was perfect. What was interesting about this is, since it was during the pandemic, George and I had to do a system where I would box up all of this equipment for audio recording, and I would have to drive down from South Burlington to Waterbury, leave it on his porch. He would then pick it up, and I'd have instructions on how to record stuff and do things, and he would record it, and then he'd call me up and say it's ready, and I would come back down and pick up the box, cross our fingers that everything worked good. So it was a little bit of a back and forth, but it was wonderful working with George, and the film would not have been what it was without his narration. The script was written by me, but one thing I do want to say, people have come up at some of the other screenings, and because of the first-person narrative that I did, were curious if there were any journals or anything like that. There sadly was not. As far as I can tell, Romaine was not a journaler or anything like that. However, I was informed by talking with the Wethersfield Historical Society, getting photo reference from a family member, getting the actual photo used in the film from Dylan Tenney, who's is great nephew of Romaine. His full name is actually Dylan Romaine Tenney, which I thought was wonderful. He was very supportive. And then there's many articles on Romaine that were helpful for writing the script, which took about 6 months. This is a model sheet for me to make sure that when I animate that I keep the character looking similar. So I basically use this to see the full body, and then some turn angles to make sure that I'm being consistent with the lines that I draw, which will become more clear in a second here, because I used a technique called rotoscope animation. It was actually invented in 1915, and what it used to be was they would take a film camera and project one frame of the film onto a sheet of glass. They would then put a piece of paper over the sheet of glass and then draw over the top of that one frame of film. So you would choose what you want to trace, what you want to add, what you want to take away, all that type of stuff. And you do that over and over and over again, frame by frame, to get a very realistic, smooth animation is why it was invented in the early 1900s. As I mentioned before, I'm very cartoony in my style, so this helped me keep it serious and somber like it deserved to be. I used some modern technology, though, to adapt this a little bit. Here's a picture of me using an iPad and Apple Pencil. Same type of thing though, having to film video of an actor, which I will get to in a second about who the actor was. An actor doing the action and then digitally frame by frame doing it. So same technique. Something I didn't realize until after the fact is I felt like I was kind of honoring Romaine in a way with his lack of gas-powered machinery and electricity and things. I was using an old-fashioned technique adapted to some modern things, but still frame by frame doing it old school. So you'll probably see the actor. I did not plan on being Romaine Tenney or being the actor for this. However, with the pandemic hitting, I didn't have a lot of options to kind of keep this moving. So there's me at my parents' patio. I'm trying to create on the left here, this is going to be a tree branch, and I'm going to walk underneath it. So I get the angle high up on a deck, looking down at this patio of me in overalls and boots and hat, walking the way that I want to walk and doing what I need to do. You'll notice the gas grill did not make it into the final film. I chose not to have that. But it was just a process of filming. I think it was 75 different video shots for the entire film that had to be filmed and edited like a traditional film, and then rotoscope animated after that. And here's an example of what happens. The first pass is line art, so you see me walking. The second pass is color, where I've added color to those areas. The final pass is background and effects. So first pass, just line art drawing, just the color added. And just so you know, like, to draw one of the frames is probably 20 minutes, and then to color it in is probably another 5 to 10 minutes, so time adds up pretty quickly when you have 3,000 drawn images to do. Let's see. Come on, go. Okay. Here's an example of how I color in a character, so you can kind of see how long this takes. It's a little hard to see, but there are outlines, and I'm dragging and dropping the different color palette down into the area, and if I've done my job well and drawn the lines complete, it'll basically fill for me. So this is the process of how I have to do it, frame by frame by frame. And you can see why that model sheet earlier is so important, of making sure I'm filling the colors correctly and keeping it consistent as I go. There's me at the end of the process, and I'm getting a little loopy after doing a whole bunch of editing and rotoscope animation. After 4 years of doing it, I did get a little loopy. And then Q&A. So that's the presentation with the history and behind the scenes. One thing I had just so you guys are aware of the presentation, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. Thanks to our friends at NWA TV, they're actually filming the presentation so that can be on your public access station for people to be able to see. So thank you for them. But does anyone have any questions or comments or anything about any of the process? Let's do you here, yeah.
In Scotty, did you get, well, you grew up in the area too, but did you get a sense from people of how they feel about how their life and culture in the area has changed since the highway?
That's a great question. So just to repeat it is, did folks in Ascutney, what was the impact basically of the highway on their life and how they live their life and whatnot. One thing I didn't mention and forgot to is the Historical Society had original documents, and just in Wethersfield, Ascutney, which is a small little town, there were 30 individuals affected just by Interstate 91 coming through. I was not aware until I talked to the Historical Society that still to this day there are hard feelings about that. They were talking about how Wethersfield to Scutney kind of got a double whammy where there was the highway that came through and then there was a dam put in their town and gobbled up kind of some of the land. So I think people definitely were affected. They talked about how they lost part of their, I don't want to call it a downtown, but some of that identity that they had. And I think to this day, there's still some hard feelings about that, I would say, from talking to them. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. I think there was a question behind you.
Just a real quick question. So his land was in a Scutney, right? And does a Scutney have its own historical society?
Yeah, so it gets a little confusing, and I should have explained this. Wethersfield is the town and Ascutney is the village within it, so that's why I'm kind of interchangeably using them. They do have the Wethersfield Historical Society is the historical society for Ascutney and for Wethersfield. Yeah, so it's a little confusing.
I just have one other thing to add. If you're looking for Vermont stories, being in St. Albans, you might want to think about the raid.
Oh, excellent. So a suggestion was the raid here in St. Albans for a potential next project. So if you have ideas, I would love to hear them because I have right now a leading contender, if you're interested for the next project, is the Barnard Panther, which was in 1881. I'm not saying this was the last mountain lion, but this was the last confirmed, that's the technical term, mountain lion in the state of Vermont was sighted and killed in Barnard in 1881. It was a very large mountain lion and has been, according to Fish and Wildlife, the last one since then. However, there are sightings. They get about 50-something a year sightings. So I originally called it the last catamount, and I quickly changed that because a lot of people were very upset about me saying it was the last catamount. Did anyone else have any questions? Yeah, right here.
Was the state, with eminent domain, were they going to take all of the 90 acres? Or was it part of it?
Yeah, this is a great question. So the question is, are they taking all of the 90 acres for eminent domain or just part of it? And the answer is there still is part of the Tenney farm in existence to this day. It's just some land that they're actually doing an Ascutney Fest at this weekend at the Tenney farm. So it was not the entire 90 acres. I'm not sure on the percentage of what percentage it was. I can look at that though, find out.
The amount offered in
Yeah.
in today's dollars just seems so amazingly low.
I know. The comment was about the today's dollar conversion being so low. I think is very true. And honestly, I don't know which it is, or if it's a bit of both, but I think with land and home prices today, it shows you how maybe out of whack and out of skew that is in comparison. But I think there could be cases to be made of what was that in that time period was an adequate amount of money, and I don't have the answer to that. I think there was another question right there.
You showed a number of Tenney family members.
Yes.
And obviously they have the community show up at the community meeting. And
Yes.
I was curious what they've expressed about your work and bringing Tenney's story to others around the state and outside of the state.
Yep.
And so, just to sum up, I was curious what Tenney's family had to say about your film.
Yeah.
Any thoughts they had expressed about it?
Great. So the question was, what does the Tenney family think of my project and what it is that I'm doing? And that's a great question. And to be honest, from the beginning was honestly a worry I had presenting this story. I wanted to be as accurate and historical as I could be. I wanted to make sure that I portrayed things accurately, and at the same time, I wanted to make sure I didn't want to do anything that would upset the Tenneys. And to be honest, that was a huge worry I had through the whole process. I constantly was thinking about that. Thankfully, I connected through the town of Wethersfield is very protective of Romaine Tenney's story, which is fantastic. When I reached out to try to find the image that's used in the film, it was fantastic. They said, you'll have to talk to the town manager, I think it was, about why you're doing what you're doing, because we've had a lot of inquiry after the New York Times piece. So I said, no problem. So I went to and talked with the town manager. The town manager kind of vetted what I was doing and was like a gatekeeper, and then very much was like, okay, I'll connect you with a family member. They connected me with a family member who was, I was kind of on pins and needles because I didn't know how this was gonna go. But it went really great, and she was very supportive and basically said, we're interested in keeping this story alive, and we want the story to kind of live on and be told, and we think it's important. So let me look and see what I can find for you. She found some other photos, and then through a connection on Facebook, a friend of a friend of a friend, Dylan Tenney connected with me, and I was posting work in progress clips over the 4 years online, and he connected with me and was instantly also very warm, very open, saying he loved what I was doing, encouraging me to go forward. So there was support, at least from a few members of the family that I've gotten so far. The nervous thing a little bit is, for me, is they have not, I haven't shown it to them directly with me standing there in front of them if they've seen it. So I'm waiting to see what they say in September, because the last show that I'm going to do around the state is in Springfield, which is near my hometown and near Ascutney. And happenstance occurred where it's on September 12th, which is the exact 60th anniversary of Romaine Tenney's passing, and that's when it'll screen in Springfield. So I'm going to reach out to the family ahead of time, see if I can get them involved, get them screeners ahead of time, see what they want to do. They've already shown interest in wanting Blu-ray and DVD copies to have for posterity and things like that. So I expect all good things. I've had support so far, so I assume that into the future. But still, when you're doing a film like this, it's important for me that it's done respectfully, and I hope that they see that when I do it. So that was a great question. Yeah?
So, obviously, Tenney's life and his death and his situation and story is certainly unique, but it is true that farmers in Vermont, as well as the rest of the world, do face particular risks to their health and their well-being, both physical accidents, mental health. I actually do think that I've heard at one point that there is a higher rate of suicide among farmers, and I wondered if you knew about that data, or if that's true, or what?
Yeah, it was a great question, talking about how there's higher rates of physical harm or physical injury and mental health issues that farmers face, and is there a higher rate of suicide with farmers? And I have to confirm the information, but I had someone at a showing in Montpelier come up afterwards and talk very much about how there are higher rates of suicide for individuals that are farmers. But I do have to verify that and get the exact, what the percentages are, but I have been told that. Yeah?
Did someone in Tenney's family, did someone get the 13,000 plus that the state was giving out for the land?
That is a great question that I don't fully have the answer to, that I've been trying to figure out how to ask Dylan Tenney that. I've been wanting to know the answer. I assume someone must have in the family, but I don't know for certain. I sure hope so. Yeah?
Has anyone considered the vast demographic changes that the interstate, not only 91 but 89, is that, and I think it's been commented by others, how Vermont has known previously completely changed politically, in terms of the demographics and culturally. Has there been any discussion about how this was kind of a watershed, the construction of these two interstate systems?
Yeah, the comment in question was a really good one, is basically the Interstate 91 and 89, how has there been, yes, an impact on demographics around the state, what the state was before, what the state is after, changes since, and I'm totally agree with you that I think there has been major shifts in that. I don't have particular expertise in that area, but I can say that I've talked with many people at the last 2 showings that have expressed a lot of concern and can see similarities in some ways with the question of progress when it comes to housing, development, things like that are occurring around the state now in our contemporary times. But I think it's a great point. I think it has totally shifted and changed from what it used to be.
Well, before, just to follow up, before the construction of these state systems, Vermont was essentially a Republican state, for example, and each town one representative, and of course there were other dynamics at play politically changing this, but there's no question that the interstate system opened it up for a northeast corridor, and people from other backgrounds would be big and it changed.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly that's probably true. Yeah. Yes?
I love the shortness of it because I felt like the story was just like so impactful, but also it made you want to know so much more. I'm glad you did this whole presentation afterwards, but it makes me wonder, like, do you want to expand on it and make it bigger?
This is a great question. Should it be expanded? Do I want to expand on it? Do I want to make it bigger? I do know, and this is just only a little bit of factoid that I have, is when I was invited to the Made Here Film Festival in Burlington in April, I think it was. For the first time, I don't know why I never bumped into this person before, but there's an individual that is a Vermont filmmaker that is actually trying to create this as a full feature, Romaine Tenney's story as a full feature. I'm forgetting the gentleman's name right now, which maybe it's Sean Kirby, maybe. But he's working on that. He's had some support. He was part of the screenplay incubator that they did where he was able to read and have actors kind of do a scene from it. So I know he's actively trying to expand that. I think it totally could be expanded, and I'd love to see it as like a full kind of featured live action type of thing. And it's a great question. Does anyone have any other questions or comments or things I said wrong? No? All right. Oh, wait, yeah.
I was wondering, where you got your inspiration? Since you wrote this also, right? Can you speak with anybody or read any accounts of how Romaine expressed himself?
Yeah. So the question was, since I wrote and animated and did all the things, did I connect with any people or find out any ways of how Romaine may have expressed himself or said things or anything like that? And the answer was completely unexpected when I did the Essex Cinemas showing. A gentleman in the audience stood up and with a quavering voice recounted a story of how his father worked on the construction of Interstate 91. And his father knew Romaine Tenney, was familiar with Romaine's story. He talked about how as a boy they camped in the Ascutney area as his father worked on highway type stuff. And apparently his father was one of the few people that would actually, Romaine would let into his house and talk with him and things like that. And he just, you could see the generational kind of emotion that was transferred from his father to son as he talked about it. So that was one account of someone that had directly talked with Romaine. Romaine, as far as I can tell from all the research, wasn't, one thing I didn't mention earlier, he wasn't like a political figure. He didn't go to town meeting really very often, and he loved his life that he had, and he didn't in any way, like it would have been easy to assume that with construction and everything coming in that he could have, been been aggressive or anything like that, but that wasn't the case at all. He was certainly impacted and upset and angry and all those types of emotions, but he maintained that humanity. And I don't think he talked to a ton of people outside his family, if that answers your question. Yeah, yeah.
Just a comment, maybe you can speak further to it, but obviously I think we all react so strongly to this story because of this feeling of guilt or tragedy, and the way he killed himself was not quietly in the woods or hanging himself. I mean, he intentionally lit these buildings on fire and left this scar forever. And yet they can't say that nothing good did come from the highway too, so you're just left conflicted the whole time. How do you feel? Could this have been averted, or was this his choice? Like, thank you for having information on suicide prevention, because I've experienced that in my life, and it's just horrible that somebody can get to that mentality that there's no other way. But almost in his case, you almost see that there wasn't. I mean, not that there wasn't, but
you
in
can
this
see.
particular case, there's you feel like there was no other way.
Yeah, it's a very conflicted, like I have a lot of feelings about it, and I'm sure it's similar to you all that watch the film, but I think, I also have friends and family who have been affected by suicide, so the suicide prevention message was important for me to include. That message, though, just to be clear, is really for modern audiences watching the film. Someone in Montpelier took issue a little bit about me including the suicide message because they thought it was not a judgment on Romaine, but saying if only Romaine had had help, which was not in any way what I was trying to say. But I do think he had, leading up to the last day on his farm, he had started talking, as far as I can read, with friends and family, letting them know like that he didn't want to leave, that it was kind of like he saw this as an end type of point. So I think there were some signs starting along the way, but we're also, it's so difficult because we have a modern perspective that we're putting on a 60-year-old story or a 60-year-old situation. So it's so hard. There's so much conflict between could it be prevented, could it not be prevented. I really believe, and you said this, that he...
I feel like you're saying then, with how little that was understood or discussed, that there was no preventing that situation. I mean, he
and friends
made a very
and
strong decision.
and exactly. And friends and family, as I mentioned, had totally been saying, come, stay with us. There were supports that were in place there, but I think it came down to it that his love for his land and his animals and everything, that was his everything, his life, and I think he just couldn't imagine life without that. Whether that is, I'm not saying that that was good or bad, I think that's just how it was. Any other questions or comments? No? Great. So the question was, and I've gotten this at each screening, so I'm so glad you asked, is were the animals okay, basically? And the answer is yes. The animals were okay. He let the animals out of the barn. He kept his dogs outside of his house, and the animals were definitely okay. I think it also goes to show his humanity of doing what he did. He did not want any harm to come to any of his animals. So, yeah.
How unusual was it to be such, I don't want to say primitive, but having no gas-run tractor, no car in 1964 in Vermont?
Very unusual.
Because that sounds like it would have been the 40s. Because you have tractor parades. Tractors from 1940, going down Main Street. So how unusual, so that he was really an outlier in a really odd situation. it wasn't like.
Yeah, the question was like how normal was it to, in 1964 to not have gas-powered machinery or electricity, and it wasn't the norm. You're absolutely correct that that was more of a thing from the 40s and before, like, so he was a kind of a vestige of that. He kept the farm just like it was when he was born and grew up, so it's a really good question.
So he would have to make huge changes
Yes,
in his life.
massive changes, yeah. Yep. All right. Well, if anyone has any questions afterwards, I'll be down here for a little bit, so feel free to come down. But thank you for coming. It's been a pleasure bringing it here. Thank you very much.